Hello, Suzanne. Hello, Tara. Thank you so much for coming on Gaia Art Bar podcast, where we talk about our different creative processes and our sovereignty and our own internal authority in art making. And I'm so happy, again, Tara is returning to join us. She's a Reiki healer, and Suzanne is a published author. She's written 6 books. 4 of them have been published and 2 are on the way. So thank you for joining us to share with us your process as a writer. So where would you like to begin, Suzanne? Tell us about yourself.
Well, I know you're interested in my writing career and sort of how I arrived at the metaphysical phase of my writing. But just to start at the beginning, it's so important for older people to encourage students. And my sixth grade teacher told me she thought I had abilities as a writer. And then recently, I keep diaries and I kept diaries when I was a teenager because I thought, well, later in life, I might go back and see what I was thinking about as a teenager. So I found an old diary when I was 16, and I had won a little writing contest. And I wrote, "This will really help me in my career as a writer." And I had no idea that I had that kind of focus at that age. And so I majored in English in college, which was extremely helpful, to becoming a concise writer, getting the grammar down and all that. And my father said, why don't you major in something practical like home ec? Of course, that was the thinking back then, back in the day. Anyway, so I majored in English. I taught English on and off, and to children and adults, or high school students and adults. The high school part really killed me, so I didn't do that anymore. And but I do like teaching adults. So the catalyst for my creative writing, I wrote throughout my career in various jobs, but it was all business writing, annual reports, news releases, websites, and speeches. I wrote speeches for people, and I was always writing other people's stuff, never my own. So when I retired, that was the opening for my being able to do what I wanted to do. And then a couple of years later, my husband died in 2013, and his death was the catalyst for my spiritual journey, which is reflected in my books.
Mhm. And so what happened? What say it was a catalyst? Tell us how you opened up to your spiritual journey from that experience.
Well, after he died, um, I would go outdoors, I'd look at the stars at night, and I would say, "Where are you?" I'm not getting anything. I'm not getting any signs or anything, just crickets, out there. And he did, I think, appear to me once in a dream. I think I got a real visitation at that point. But that was the only sort of metaphysical thing that occurred. A few months later, 6 months after he died, I went to a writer's retreat up in the country in Virginia. Wonderful place. And my suite mate was a published author, and she had written a book called Friends in High Places. And we were encouraged to put our books out, those who had published. And so I read her book on the porch. And it was all about mediumship and ghost busting and so on. So I said, "Well, Katie, are you a medium?" And she said, "I'm an amateur medium. I don't charge, for what I do." And I said, "Well, can you connect with my late husband?" She said, "Yeah, probably. What's his name?" And so she had a yellow notepad, and she went in her room, and she came back about a half hour later, and she had described him perfectly. And what he was doing, the swim trunks, the orange swim trunks he was wearing, which he used to wear. Yeah, what he looked like. He had a black lab. He had had a black lab that he had loved at one point. And what came through sounded like him, and she described him physically. And then she said, well, he'd rather talk to you. He doesn't want to really talk to me. And I said, well, I don't know how to do that, but, you know, you just keep talking and I'll find another way to reach him. So some months after that, I attended a meeting of a group I belong to called IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And it was founded by astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who had a sort of a spiritual awakening coming back from the moon and viewing beautiful Earth. And he realized then that there was much more to the universe than physical laws of gravity and a bunch of rocks floating around in space. And he wanted to merge spirituality with science. And that is happening now. That has happened since, in a very big way, since he formed that organization, but not just that organization, but all over the planet, it's happening with the near-death experience
Can I
studies.
ask you a question quickly?
Mhm. Uh-huh.
Um, so when your friend communicated with your husband and she told you what he's doing, what was he doing? Where was he? Did you get a sense of that? Like, was he
Yeah.
close by? Was he close by without form, or was he communicating from another dimension? Was he with familiar people? Like you said, there was a dog that had passed away, so he was with this dog in present time when you were communicating. How did you experience that, and how did you come to understand where he was and what he was doing?
Well, later I learned in my long spiritual journey that on the other side, we can create any scene we want to. We can be part of any scene. We can have a picnic. We can play golf. We can ride motorcycles. It's all there. You think it and it happens. You think a place and you're there. So at the moment that he was contacted, the medium said that he was at the beach and he liked the beach and that he was in these orange swim trunks, which he had in real life, and with the dog, and he was having a nice time.
Wow.
Amazing.
That we talk about that a lot, like this idea of being able to manifest, right? That you think it and you feel it, and then it happens
Right.
almost automatically in the physical realm. So that's very interesting that is what possibly is happening once we leave the body. I know that my father recently passed away, and I know that he felt jubilation drop
Right.
in the body because he had really been suffering and was very uncomfortable physically with his
Yeah.
breathing and with just the density of the body, and that the moment that he left the body, that it was just pure
Yes.
jubilation.
I've
Word.
studied, yeah, all the near-death experience people say that. I don't know how
Yeah.
much you've gotten into, but I'm a real student of the near-death experience. I listen to one of their accounts every day because it really helps my understanding of how things work.
I love the book by Anita Morjani. Have you read that one?
I've heard her
That Be
speak.
Me.
Yeah.
That one really was pivotal for me in my understanding
Right. She's
of
one of the great
what occurred.
spokeswomen for near-death experiences. Yeah.
What about you, Tara? Have you had communication with loved ones who have passed away? Have you had any experiences like that?
I have, yeah. And I wanted to say, Dr. Moody came to IONS and shared with us the great father uh, of the afterlife. And what it's done for me is, I've always been a seeker, and I don't know for sure, but it gives me a faith that energy never dies. It's just tunes into a different frequency. And my belief and my faith has been really strengthened about the connection we have through the veil. I believe it's just a different frequency that we go to, and that we're able to tune in to our loved ones with our animals, thank goodness. And and we're still, I think, a very valuable part in helping them and them helping us. So a lot of times we just think, oh, they're on the other side, they're in this loving space, they're here to support me. And they are, but we here on this planet are also here to help them, support them along with their journey as well. And that's evolved, as I've been a seeker and studying as well as Suzanne, these have become kind of my beliefs as we move forward. And it feels good to believe. It feels really, so why not? Why not just
Why
believe?
not? I know.
Yeah, it
My
makes
ch
life so much more beautiful.
yeah, my children are still skeptical about my contacts with their father. Um, but I guess they humor me. But um, I did eventually get signs from Ned, from my husband,
Yeah.
and he is present. I've remarried, but my current husband um, accepts Ned, and he's part of our life. He comes in.
Yes.
My current husband really is much more attuned to the other side than I am. I'm really, I need other people to tune in for me.
Yeah.
I do get signs from my late husband, and some of them were pretty funny, actually. But he, when he's around, he will have flashes of light that surround me.
Mm.
And it's not just my implants from my cataract surgery. Sometimes I thought it was that, but I mean, these are real flashes of of white energy that surround me,
Mm.
and I know he's there. And one of the books I read said that they're in heaven, but in a sense, we are their heaven
Mhm.
because they like to hang around us. If we all got along and loved each other, of course they would like to hang around us. They're around. Now, my current husband, he knows when my mother's around, and she makes her presence known.
Yeah.
And she is very happy about our marriage. She's really happy that
Yeah.
I'm happy, you know.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so is my late husband. He's a little bit jealous, but but he actually gave me the confidence to go ahead with this marriage that I have now.
So
He
it's
knew that I was
clear.
lonely. Yeah,
So it's very clear that in death, we're still present, but we're just in a different form.
right,
And that kind of goes into these ideas of multidimensionality, that there are different dimensions of experience occurring simultaneously, and that we can choose where we want to play in our time in the body. So how does that all of that tie into this idea of the muse? Because we a lot of us have experienced having guides, having beings of light. It could be an ascended master or the angels or a loved one on the other side or ancestors. Many of us work with our ancestral guides. And so how does that tie into the artistic process, the writing process, and this idea of the muse? Because we've all had this experience as writers and artists where the energy just flows and
mm,
everything, and you're even surprised about at
yeah,
how amazing the words are flowing and everything is awesome, and you're like, wow, this is really good. And then other times it's more like a birthing process, and I think both are important.
right,
There are times when it doesn't flow, and we're shifting, and we're kind of in that in between space, which is equally important in the process. So
right.
so how these communications with your husband, how did that open up your world to the muse in your
Right.
writing process?
Well, my first channel book was with Thomas Jefferson, or somebody presenting as Thomas Jefferson, let's say. And my second channel book was with Leonard Cohen, and we can talk about that later, the great musician who wrote Hallelujah that everybody sings now. Anyway, I asked Leonard, I had 8 sessions with a spirit who told me he was Leonard. And I said, why don't you send us a song? We'd like to have a song or a poem from you from where you are with your perspective. And he said, no, we don't do that on the other side. We are muses. We work through people on earth. If they are open to us, if they're on the same wavelength with us, if they have liked our music, if they've liked our style, and if they're trying to write in that style, then we will give them inspiration. We will be their muses. And so that to me was the explanation of the muse. I am writing a novel, my first and probably my only novel, because I'm putting everything I have into it. And it is flowing so easily. It's so much fun. And I feel like I have somebody or others helping me with it. I don't know who they are, but I am very inspired to write this book. I think it's interesting, but it has a lot of wisdom in it that I have acquired over the years.
Can you tell us a little bit about the story? What is the novel about?
Well, of course, it has to be a love story. And the people the
For
man
sure.
and woman get together at the end, but they have a lot of trouble in between. I've learned, then I wrote this is interesting. I heard that about a God box. You know about the God boxes, Tara.
Yeah.
So I found this little box, and I heard that if you write a request down of the higher powers and put it in the box, it might come true. So 20 years ago, I wrote on a piece of paper my book, and I put it in the God box. And I wrote a book with these characters in it that are in this new book. I put it on the shelf and I didn't go back to it. I've looked at it now and it was no good. And I've completely rewritten the book with the same cast of characters. So much better now because I've learned so much in those 20 years that I
Yeah.
didn't know at the time. I've learned to write better too. I've learned to, write dialogue, and before it was just all description. Anyway, I think somebody's helping me. I don't know who though.
Mm.
But back to working with a medium on these metaphysical books. Tara and I mentioned this group called IONS, Institute of Noetic Sciences. Anyway, so after I worked with the amateur medium, I found a professional medium through IONS, through an author who was speaking there about a book, a channeled book that she had written about 7 people who had died. And she was a skeptic at the beginning, but she had a strained relationship with her mother, and she asked to speak to her mother. And her mother talked about her side of the question and helped her understand their relationship a whole lot better. And then she had some other friends channeled, and she wrote the result of those conversations and published the book, and it won some prizes. So I said, well, if this medium that she worked with is that good that a book was published about her readings, maybe I should contact her. So I got in touch with the medium. Her name is Jana Anna. She lives in Indiana. It rhymes. And my only purpose at the time was to connect with my late husband. So I did that for a number of years, just talking with him. And then I branched out and talked with my mother and father. And recently, my 2 brothers have died. I've talked with them. And my best friend died, and I've talked with her. I've had friends come over who wanted to talk with their deceased relatives, and they felt that they got the real deal. And corroboration happened with my friend Debbie. We wanted to connect with our friend Phoebe, who had died. So I said, "Come over, Debbie. We're going to dial up Phoebe." And so I'd made an appointment with the medium, and then we got in a room all to ourselves. And I always have a yellow notebook. I always take really careful notes because the sessions with the medium are recorded, but I never wanted to go back and listen to an hour's worth of recordings. So I took really good notes on the yellow notepad. So anyway, I was taking notes. So we got Phoebe, and she was telling us some very specific things about her family that nobody else would know. So then the medium broke in and she said, Debbie, do you have a brother? And Debbie said, yes. And she said, your brother needs you now. So Debbie left and got in her car, and she called her brother. And he said, Debbie, I need you now. My daughter has cancer. Anyway, after that, Debbie was a believer.
Yeah.
And
So
so,
how did Thomas Jefferson come in?
okay, that came later. Um,
Like, how did you recognize certain characters from history? How did
yeah, well, I had written two books that were not channel books. They were very they took me a long time to write. Uh, the first one was about Thomas Jefferson's mentor, who I think gave him all his best ideas. His name was George Wythe. And the title of that book is Jefferson's Godfather. That took a lot of work. That took 5 years on and off for me to do with footnotes and bibliography. And then I wrote a second book that has Jefferson in it about the law school that he helped found, and that the first professor was the man I wrote about, George Wythe. And that's a whole nother story about how I connected with George Wythe on the other side. But so in fall of one year, the medium always gives me a reading about myself at the beginning, where she sees me and where the universe sees me and people on the other side sees me at the moment. Sometimes they would see me surrounded by color, sometimes they'd see me sad, whatever. Anyway, so this particular session, the medium said, and I had no idea what she was talking about. She said, we see you as a scribe, writing down very important things from history. And you've had past lives as a scribe. That's part of your journey. And we see you as a metaphysical historian. So I wrote that down on my yellow notepad, but I really didn't know what it meant. So COVID began. This was 2020. I was confined here, but I was very happily confined because I had my writing to keep me company. So I said, metaphysical historian, metaphysical historian, what does that mean? Maybe I should contact Thomas Jefferson. Why not? I said, is he too important or too busy, to talk to a lowly person like me? And so I said, well, what the heck? I'll just give it a try. So I didn't tell the medium ahead of time who I wanted to contact. So I didn't want her to prepare for it. She doesn't want to work that way anyway. She wants to have things come in spontaneously. So so she said, who do you want to contact today? I said, Thomas Jefferson. She didn't miss a beat. And in a few seconds, she said, she was trying to connect with him. She said, I think I have the right person. And he says he's been waiting for this. Spirits apparently there's like a green light on the other side. When you are thinking really hard about somebody who's crossed over, they know it somehow because it's all telepathy. And so I think he knew that I had written about quite a lot about him. And I think he knew that I wanted to talk to him. So I was very humble and I said, I have an idea for a book. And I said, would you agree to work with me on a book about your views from where you are now? And he said that he would be willing, that he thought I was coming from a good place, not to make money, not to be egotistical about it, but to convey important information. So I said, great. And so I went online and I saw some living people who had written books about Thomas Jefferson. And I was able to find their emails, and I asked them, I said, I presented it to them as a class project because there was no way I was going to tell them what I was really doing. And because they're all materialists. And so I said, as a class project, and I told them where I'd taught before, um, I'm going to ask if you could talk to Thomas Jefferson, what questions would you ask? And so 8 of them got back to me and they gave me some good questions, some I hadn't thought of. And I had my own questions. So I combined all those questions and I had 8 or 9 sessions, 1-hour sessions with an entity who was presenting himself as Thomas Jefferson. And so when all was, and then since the sessions were recorded, I took notes, but we were going too fast for me to get everything. And so the recordings were sent to me right after the sessions. And so I would spend hours with each recording, typing up the whole conversation, every single word to get every single word accurate. And then I would divide what was being discussed into subject matter by chapter. So there was a chapter on government, what he thinks about today's government, or at the time, 2020, what was going on. The media, our foreign policy, religion, higher education, all those current issues that we're dealing with. And so he had very interesting things to say about all of that.
So what did he say about, so what did he express about 2020? That was quite an eventful year. What
Yes.
were his comments on what was going on?
Well, he's very unhappy about what's going on with our government. Again, it was 2020, but he talked about the greediness and the corruption. And he said, I walk the halls of Congress, which used to be sacred to us, founding fathers, and I'm dismayed. And he talked about a lot of things that are well known. A lot of what he said wasn't brand new, but it was coming through him. Graft, corruption, self-seeking, feathering one's nest, not serving the people. And yeah, that I'll show you the cover of this book if anybody's interested in getting it. Can you see?
Yeah, the Metaphysical Thomas Jefferson. And we'll
Yeah.
put a link in the description
Right.
where
There we
people
go.
can order it if they'd
Mhm.
like to. But the thing that's fascinating to me about the document that, the Declaration of Independence, um, is that at the time it was so unique and so original to think that way and to, lay out this foundation for this new nation to be birthed according to those ideals and those ideas, of equality and, which coming from, at the time, they were coming from a monarchy. And so can you tell us a little bit about what he said about that? As far as the originality of his concepts.
He said everybody ought to read it, that everybody talks about it, but nobody reads it today. That's one thing he said.
Yeah.
And so I have included the Declaration of Independence in that book. It's in the back of the book for everybody to read. He did say that he and the other founding fathers, the good ones, were divinely inspired to create a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It was a radical, radical change from thousands of years of strong men and kings and queens and dictators and so on. I never asked him if he was inspired to write the Declaration of Independence. He did get those ideas about government mostly from a philosopher, John Locke. Those ideas were not entirely original to Jefferson, and he later acknowledged that. But I am thinking myself, even though I didn't ask him specifically about the Declaration, I'm sure that he was inspired by those on the other side. It was
Mhm.
beautifully, beautifully written. And undying ideas, prose. He was an excellent writer. He was not a good speaker. Patrick Henry, that frosts me a lot, was a good speaker, and he's the one who's being remembered today. But my guy, George Wythe, who taught Thomas Jefferson, is not remembered. That's kind of a bone of contention.
And I love the concept of this birthright that we have as humans of freedom,
Mhm.
the right to express ourselves and the right to choose how we live. And it's so beautiful to
Yeah.
like this is how our nation was founded
Right.
on those concepts. And of course, there have been many distortions and but we do have that idealism at the foundation, at the core of the frequency of this country.
Right. Well, he wrote that we are all entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, originally, so I've read, he didn't have the pursuit of happiness in there. It was something like the right to own property. Well, he nixed that because that would have been interpreted as the right to own slaves because they were considered a person's property. So life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, why did he choose the pursuit of happiness? So I go into that in my first book about his mentor, Jefferson's godfather. Um, the founding fathers, all the intellectuals of the day studied Greek philosophy, the Greek democracy and Roman government, and the Roman Republic and the Greek democracy, but they also studied the great philosophers. And so Plato believed that a good government was for the happiness of the people. If you had a king or queen or dictator who was basically stealing from you to become wealthy and had no good intent for the people would not be happy. And so if you have a good government with good leaders, then the people down the line will be much happier. Things will be better. Everything will be better. That's why he wrote that. But that was the idea originally of Plato and some of the early philosophers.
Hmm. Yeah.
What do you think some of the biggest takeaways from him are, Suzanne?
From Jefferson,
Yeah.
well, after he had complained so much about our government and all of our institutions, I said, well, what would you do? You know,
Right.
if you were living now, what would you do? And he said, I said, what would you do as president? And he said, if I were president right now, I could do very little because I would not
Mm.
have a following. He said, you have to have a following to create great change. And he said, I'd probably try to enter Congress and I would try to look around and find like-minded people who hadn't lost their integrity yet. After a while, a lot of them do lose their integrity because it's a get rich quick scheme. And then there's the power and the ego involved. But he said, I would try to get those who still have integrity, and we would form a circle, a little power circle, and with the intent that it would grow and it would be a circle of integrity. He said, and this, again, this is 2020. He said, but that circle hasn't formed yet, but I'm hoping that it will form and that things will change for the better.
Mm.
Wow. Wow. So, Suzanne, I'm curious, this process that you have for channeling this book, right? How has that been received?
Good question. I made the mistake of I have taught these adult education classes for a long time. My first book was straight history. That was fun. Everybody liked that. And then I got
Yeah.
the idea, well, I'll have a class on the metaphysical Thomas Jefferson. Well, I read the reviews. The talk was really pretty good, actually. It was very good. But half the people thought I was nuts. And so I canceled all my future talks about that book. I will
Oh
talk to
my,
people like, well, to regular people, earth people, they think you're nuts.
yeah,
So no, I'm not, I
yeah,
don't want people to think I'm crazy. So, because I'm surrounded by earth people. So anyway, I do talk to people like you guys because we're on the same wavelength. And I have been on many other podcasts where the interviewer was on my wavelength. And so I reach people that way, but I don't
yeah,
talk to earth people about it.
I
yeah,
just, my latest blog, which is covers this topic of remaining sovereign in your creative process. And that part of it is knowing when to speak and when to be silent, and how not to dilute your expression because you want people to understand. It's like um that really leaning into that internal authority and that inner trust, and being aware when people are receptive and when they're not, and keeping your art and your essence um holy and protected. It's really honoring your voice and honoring your art. So I commend you for really protecting your sovereignty in the way that you write. And if people aren't, not all language is for all ears, and so we have to have discernment.
Right. Well, I found that earth people who actually read the book find it fascinating, even though they might not accept the way that it was channeled. They probably think I wrote it. That's okay. And I say in the beginning, it doesn't matter whether you believe in the channeling or not. The book is important, and it has important information in it. So take it however you wish to take it.
Mhm.
But the problem was when I got up and tried to speak about the book, it's not the same as reading it. And I realized that speaking about it to earth people was not the best way to go.
Mm.
But I talk about it with people like you because, you understand and your listeners understand these things.
Yeah, so thank you for sharing with us. It's fascinating, in my opinion. And
I'm so proud of you, Suzanne, pioneering this process. And it may not be totally accepted now, but give it 10, 20 years and you'll probably be this really famous historian, metaphysical historian in, in
Yes.
10 or 20 years, starting this whole ability to do this, right? And to offer truth, divine truth to history. I
Right,
mean, how important and valuable is that? Everyone writes history from their own point of view. This is divine interpretation. It's
right,
really beautiful.
right. Well, if I live long enough, I do plan to write more channel books. I need to get this novel out first.
Yeah.
And then I'm kind of waiting for Bob Dylan to die. Sorry, Bob.
Bob Dylan. Sorry, Bob. That'll be a
But
good
I
one.
thought he
Yeah.
might be
you
pretty
wouldn't
interesting.
contact him. um so you would prefer to talk to him after he left the body than now when he's
Oh,
still.
of course, yes. He'll know so much more.
Hmm.
He'll know the truth.
There's like the veil is lifted.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. He'll
There's
have
more
very interesting.
transparency, more transparency.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. So the first question that I would ask was, what was it like to die? And I asked that of Leonard Cohen. And he said, he was funny. He was really funny. He said, well, I left my body and I looked back on that puny body. And I said, geez, I wish I'd taken better care of myself. And because he was, elderly when he died. And then he said that he felt like like all the near-death experience people feel love, that he felt his mother was loving him in a way that she had not loved him in real life. And that really ruined his life, actually, not having love. He
You know,
never got things right after that.
as I mentioned, my father passed away in September of 2024. And I do feel that in my connection with him, it is more transparent, and he does see things in me that when he was present in the body, alive, um, that he had filters. He had his own conditioning, his own way of seeing things, his own wounds, his own ego, and that created these filters that affected our communication. Whereas now there's this transparency and this expansiveness that I feel in the connection. And I do receive communications that are, I see you. I see who
Yeah.
you are, and promptings that I know are coming from him, and encouragement. Um, and with a very clear statement that when I was there, I just didn't know how
Right.
to express these things to you. But now it's like a transmission that I receive,
Yes.
not words. It's a feeling.
Mm.
And then I just feel that presence.
Right.
It's really beautiful. So it's just like this different form. And it's hard
Exactly.
because, I can't touch them and hug them and it's sad because that form is gone. But this transformation of the relationship and how we communicate, and it really shows me that, death, as far as that there's nothing there, it doesn't exist. That it's just so clear that we just move into a different form. And so I love any kind of meditation practices or mindfulness and those types of things, because the way that you perceive remains the same, you know,
Yeah.
and also your capacity for clarity, because there's many beings that leave the body and they're very confused, and they're kind of in a liminal confused state, whereas I heard one of the best stories was from a spiritual teacher I had, and she was talking about the mantra, repeating the mantra, that it's a practice. It's a practice to train the mind to focus on the divine. So the mantra is a sound sequence that you
Right.
repeat in your mind during meditation. And it's a practice that's done every day to the point where it just becomes automatic. And so Gandhi, he was assassinated, and he had this training in his mind, in his soul, in his whole being, with the mantra. And that was he was, I believe he was stabbed. But whatever happened was very shocking. And his mind first went to his mantra, Shri Ram. And so I thought that was amazing
Right.
to be in something that's very unexpected and shocking, but the first focus is on the divine in that moment is very powerful.
Yes.
Yeah. It's
And I'm
amazing.
glad that meditation now is popular in the West. We're getting a lot more spiritual. There's all this stuff going on up at the top that's terrible. But down below with us people, there's a great awakening, as you well know, all across the planet. People are much more open to spirit now, I think.
Yeah,
And
it's a beautiful movement for sure.
yeah,
I think we're all a part of it. And that little circle that Thomas Jefferson was talking about, maybe we're a part of that little circle and helping to
positive
grow.
energy.
But I wonder if there's ever been a period on the planet that we know of where greed and power struggles has not prevailed in government and leadership. Like, do you know of any time where it wasn't that way, or didn't, or maybe it didn't start that way, but it became that way? It just seems like it's something that we continue to need to learn from in this plane of existence.
Yeah.
And
Also, real quick, Suzanne, I bought your books, the Thomas Jefferson book on Amazon. Can I still get it on Amazon?
Yes.
I bought it for friends. It's a great book to give away to family and friends, Christmas, birthdays. And especially if you have a lot of attorneys in your family. I have a lot of attorneys in my family, and they all love reading about Thomas Jefferson. So you can still get it on Amazon, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
we'll put the link in the description of
Yeah.
this video when we post the video. And you have a website too, right?
Yes.
So we'll put a link to your website, and we'll put a link to Tara's website and Gaia
Thank
Art
you.
Bar. And so thank you so much. This has just been a wonderful conversation. And I just want to thank you for joining us today, Suzanne and Tara, for another
Thank you.
great podcast. And I hope that you continue to work on this wonderful novel. I can't wait to read your novel, Suzanne.
It's going to be good. I hate to say it, but
But it's just the
I'm
truth.
really enjoying writing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And give love to your sweet husband,
Oh, I certainly will. Certainly
both of
will.
them.
So,
I will.
yeah. So anyway, we'll continue to be offering this kind of content about art and spirituality and metaphysical ideas and multidimensionality. So if any of you of our listeners have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and comment and let us know your thoughts on being a scribe and
Yeah.
working with mediums and creating art with in collaboration with your guides and spirits from the other side. So thank you so much.
Enjoyed it.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Suzanne.
See you next time.
Till next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.